There's not a single incentive for a physician to do a C-section by a certain date or for a baby to be born by a certain time or before I go off shift because I want that reimbursement. There's none of that's been in place. So I think that's a really big deal because there's nothing that's making me hurry the process or change what I'm doing. I'm focused on the safety and the priority being that birthing person, that family, the baby, whatever needs to happen.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Okay, if you're new around here, let me ask you something. Do you know what our nation's C-section rate is? If you're not new around here, you probably instantly said, duh, 33% and climbing. Some stats even say a little bit higher, like 34 or 35%. Do you know what the World Health Organization suggests that our C-section rate in the U.S. should be? Again, if you're not new, you probably quickly answered 10 to 15%. But, obviously, you would be hard-pressed to find any birth facility in the U.S. that actually meets that. But, what if I told you I found that unicorn? I found that diamond in the rough. I found that person who actually does have a 12% C-section rate. And she's not doing it by herself. I'm talking about a nurse midwife who serves in Pennsylvania at a small community hospital comprised of obstetrical and midwifery care models that have really nailed this. Today, I'm joined by Juli Pyle, who is a certified nurse midwife who practices at a community hospital in rural Pennsylvania. Juli is a mom of 5 who decided to go back to school after being a stay-at-home mom to raise her 5 children to become a labor and delivery nurse, where she quickly discovered her passion for midwifery care and decided to go back again to school to complete her master's degree in nursing. And in 2020, she began her career as a midwife. Juli also serves on the Pennsylvania MMRC, which is the Maternal Mortality Review Committee for anyone not familiar. She's also worked as interim adjunct nursing professor for a local university BSN program. She is an administrator for a large birth worker online community and has served on many local committees and is dedicated to offering quality midwifery care to low and high risk populations. In today's episode, we're going to dive into exactly how this little community hospital achieved such mind-blowing stats like a 12% C-section rate. And I want to break it down because some people out there think even 12%. Why are we having 12% C-section rates? Well, here's the thing. Some births do need C-sections. C-sections are a good tool to have in our toolbox. It would be impossible to have a 0% C-section rate. But the balance that we want to strike is that we're doing C-sections when it's appropriate and it saves lives without overdoing them and over medicalizing birth, therefore doing C-sections that are not necessary. I'm going to ask Juli, what does the rest of Pennsylvania look like? Are they truly this unicorn hospital, or are they in a state that is maybe a silent leader in birth that not a lot of people are aware of? We talk about what the integration at their hospital looks like too. Who gets to see midwives? Who gets to see OBGYNs? And what is the unit culture like? How do the OBGYNs and the midwives get along? How do they interact? How do they actually trust one another? And then, of course, we're going to talk about the taboo topics, like how this impacts their billing and RVUs, and how different governing bodies play out in patient care, which impacts their outcomes. Plus, I want to know about licensure in Pennsylvania. What does it look like when the OBs and the midwives are co managing care? And how do egos on the unit play a role? Finally, in true hee hee fashion, I'm going to ask her about 39-week elective inductions and Pitocin use. I met Julie at a nursing conference that I recently attended this summer, and we casually bumped into each other. Naturally, I asked her what she does, and then it came up in conversation about their community hospital and the amazing stats they were able to achieve. Not only did my jaw drop right then and there, but I immediately grabbed her by the shoulders and said, "You have to come on my show. I have to tell the world about what you guys are doing, because if you guys are able to achieve it, that means that we can, in some regards, replicate this around our country." Now, for anyone who's listening who works at a large academic medical system and you're thinking, yeah, right, hee hee, it would be impossible for me to implement programs and protocols at a small community hospital at my huge hospital system, I want to stop you right there and let me challenge you with something. Why? Why would it be so hard? It may be different. It may require a little bit more. You may have to have additional conversations, cut through additional red tape, go up against some additional people or naysayers. But why? If one hospital can do it, why can't you? If we all continue to say, this isn't possible, we wouldn't be able to achieve that, oh, that's just them, then let me tell you something. We're never going to rebuild the system. We're never going to fix our maternity care. We're never going to start serving moms and babies in the way that they deserve. So let me just ask you this. Give Julie and I the next hour of your time. Let us see if we might be able to give you some motivation, give you some tips and tricks of some things that are really low risk and low level and not expensive to implement in your unit. And let's see what kind of small marginal changes we might be able to take on at these large hospital systems. And for anyone who is listening who works at a small community hospital, I want you to know that obviously, because they are able to do it, you too can do the same thing. If you are a consumer, a pregnant mom, or a partner of a pregnant mom, or a doula who serves pregnant moms, I want you to listen intently, because we are giving you the exact steps of what you can do to reduce your risk of a C-section and the conversations that you can have with your provider during your prenatal appointments so that you don't fall into that 33 and growing % of people who walk into the hospital as a whole person and walk out of the hospital with a major abdominal surgery. I cannot tell you how jazzed up I am for this episode. I just feel so incredibly inspired by what this hospital in rural Pennsylvania is doing. And I know without a doubt, maybe with some hard conversations and some sweat and some tears and a lot of elbow grease, I know we can achieve it across our country. I have no doubt. And I'll be the first one to stand up and volunteer like Katniss herself to take this on. So without further ado, Julie, welcome to the show.
Hi, hee hee. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. You have no idea how excited I am for this conversation and just how much of an honor it is to have you on the show, because I think that in the last couple of years, there has been so much talk about how do we have better hospital integration? How do we get midwives and OBs to work together? How do we prevent primary C-sections? How do we prevent birth trauma for people, for women, for families, for birthers? And I think there's a lot of talk about it, But one of the things I've been really disappointed in is the actual action behind it. People love to sit around a conference room and talk about hypotheticals. People love to sit around a conference room and say, we should do this and we should do that. And wouldn't it be great if we did this? But one of the things that was so blown away about you when we met at A1 was that you don't just talk about it. You are out there doing it. You're part of a project that actually lowered your C-section rate at your facility to a place that meets the WHO standards. You guys are doing the good work to actually care for women and families in birth. And oh my gosh, just even saying that, I got chills. I'm so excited to dive into this. And so I think a really great place for us to start would be for you to just explain what the project was and where you started and maybe what your results were from the project.
Well, and I guess for us specifically, and we're in central rural Pennsylvania, kind of middle of nowhere, but I don't even know that we knew it was a project. That's how organic and really just bare bones it really was, because really the project would have started 25 years ago when a physician and a midwife decided that they were going to really integrate midwifery into a hospital practice. And when I say midwifery integrated, 99% of our labors are managed by certified nurse midwives. So that's the project, right? That's it. And I don't know what our C-section rate was 25 years ago, but I've been at this facility for 5 years and we continue to have in the teens, 12 to 15%. And even our primary C-section rate, like NTSV C-section rate, is lower than that. It's really just the midwives in the labor rooms, midwives doing the work to meet people where they're at and have really good outcomes.
That is amazing. Okay, so is that the same culture and feel across the whole state? Do you think all of Pennsylvania is like this and very birth friendly, very physiological birth forward?
I think Pennsylvania has a lot of certified nurse midwife presence in a lot of hospitals and facilities. So I was actually surprised by that because I was trained and grew up in the West, in Colorado. And there is a different vibe out here for sure. Like everybody just is more aware. It's fine. I'll have a midwife, no big deal. I think different hospitals and facilities have different ways of integrating that into practice. So it's nice to see that everybody is just really more aware, I think, in Pennsylvania and more accepting of a midwife in their care.
So, what did that integration actually look like? And I think the idea of, yeah, let everyone see a midwife and yeah, let all low risk birthers be driven by midwifery care is a really great idea. And I think it's something that a lot of facilities around our nation have goals of doing, and I think they're doing it. But then when we look at their C-section rate, we can tell they are falling short in certain areas. So, why do you think that your facility is able to actually have that as your goal and uphold it to be able to produce the results that you guys do?
I think there's a couple parts to it. One is, and this is multifaceted, right? But the trust between providers and the team. We have obstetricians and midwives that trust each other. And the obstetricians really trust us to manage the labors, and we're going to let them know when we have something that's higher risk than we should be taking care of and when something is out of the normal. And to be really honest, like we don't just manage low risk pregnancy. We really do manage medium, high risk, just not the highest, right? And that's how midwifery care is going to be moving forward because there's not enough obstetricians and there's really not enough of us midwives either, but we're all going to have to work together. So I think that's the first thing is like we trust each other and we figured out a way that we work just really well together. I think the second thing is there's a little bit more that we could do like with a GYN, like primary care, our scope, but really we see 98% of the OB patients in our office. So we're just seeing them and those are high risk people too. And we can ask our physician colleagues and send them for a consult, whatever we need to do when needed. But otherwise, like we're the ones that are there doing the work.
And are those the main two things that you think make a big difference?
I really think you have to have this really great relationship together. but where you're not stepping on each other's toes. In a lot of places, I don't know how well this could be integrated, right? But literally, our physicians are waiting for us to call them with an abnormality. They're not that saying they're not involved because they know what's happening on the labor floor, but they're going to trust that the things are going the way they need to go and things are safe unless we let them know that.
And how do you think that was cultivated? Because I think that, again, and I sound like a broken record, but I think we have so many places in the US where this is our goal and everyone desperately wants this, but being able to actually achieve this is much harder done than said. And what do you think has been really key in helping build that relationship where your OBs genuinely trust your midwives more than just, yeah, I trust them. I would have a baby with them. I'd let my daughter birth with them. No, but like genuinely, you're not overstepping care. You're not micromanaging. You're not trying to take over care because you have this little burning voice inside of your gut intuition that says, I need to be involved. Genuinely, how are you guys cultivating this true deep trust between your obstetrical team and your midwifery team?
If I can talk about the business of healthcare a little bit, because I do think that impacts what we do. Our Nothing about our practice has been driven by RVUs, which, if you know about healthcare, that's like the revenue generating unit that is talked about a lot. So there's not a single incentive for a physician to do a C-section by a certain date or for a baby to be born by a certain time or before I go off shift because I want that reimbursement. There's none of that's been in place. So I think that's a really big deal because there's nothing that's making me hurry the process or change what I'm doing. I'm focused on the safety and the priority being that birthing person, that family, the baby, whatever needs to happen, that's what's happening.
And how do you get away from that RVU driven system? What are you guys doing differently?
I'm not as well versed in the whole business side of things, but our all of our providers are employed by the hospital. That's just how we're set up. So we have our salary and that's it, right? It's not based on can I see 30 people at the office in a day? Am I catching 25 babies this month? None of that changes our salary. So again, then just the quality of care is driving what we're doing, not the quantity. Probably a whole podcast just on that if we wanted it to
Yeah.
be. But that's a huge thing. And I don't think people realize how much that has changed the culture of healthcare is that reimbursement.
And for healthcare professionals out there that are listening that feel so seen by what you just said, and they're just like shaking their head, being like, yes, I could give so much better care if I wasn't under the gun of RVUs and performance and basically seeing so many patients that I can't even remember the name of the last patient I just sat with for 15 minutes. What's your advice to them?
I think we have to be really vocal about, especially if we're going into a new job opportunity, of asking the questions, how is this done at this facility? And being really honest that if this is how this is structured, I'm likely to not accept that position because we just have to be really vocal in advocating for our own well-being as much as we would for a patient. And so it's very difficult in the healthcare setting, that system and just the everything that's going on with healthcare. But if we don't say something, nobody else is going to. So I just think we have to be really try and get on the same page and be really vocal about it.
Are there times where you are co-managing your patient's care with the OBs in your facility rather than dismissing them from midwifery care and handing them over to OBs?
Thankfully, that is how our whole practice works. So I think that's another part of why it does work. So Pennsylvania is a collaborative state, which means that I can't have an independent license for midwifery. I have to have, through the state, a collaboration with a physician. Because of that, there's good and bad for both of that. Again, that's a whole nother conversation. But because of that, anytime I admit somebody into the hospital, I'm letting the physician know this person is admitted. Here's their little short summary so that they are aware of them. So that's the first thing. But then Co-managing, we do all the time. Preeclampsia, even severe preeclampsia, type 1 diabetes, right? These are really high risk conditions, but I can still manage that labor. And then the obstetrician is aware of what I'm doing. We're back and forth talking about things that need to happen, but I'm able to help that person have a physiologic birth.
I love that so much. Okay, can you talk us through what that would actually look like? So, pretend I'm the client and I've just been diagnosed with something, let's call it severely high risk, and where most places I think would probably dismiss you from midwifery care and hand you over to obstetrical care. What are you guys doing different?
Yeah, so I would say I'm just giving you this information, right? Hi, Hee I'm here to tell you that you have a really high risk condition, and we're going to have to do a few things that maybe we weren't planning on. Let's say that's going to include induction of labor. So I'm going to be talking to Dr. So and so about you and about what's going on, and we're going to figure out the best plan medically. And I will still be able to be here to help you through labor, get labor induction going, and hopefully we'll be able to have a vaginal birth throughout this situation.
And avoid that transfer of care. Okay, so when you're having this conversation, is the OBGYN in the room? Is it all three of us now?
Sometimes, yes, depends on the whole situation, but definitely there's a triangle communication there of everything that's going on. So we're all on the same page. We know what's happening. And then, of course, the important part is getting the response from the pregnant person and their input and figuring out what we can do to make everything as smooth as possible.
Yeah, I imagine that having that OB there present for that conversation, I do imagine that some of it is a little anxiety provoking. Oh my gosh, I've been being seen by midwives this whole time, and now there's this obstetrician in the room. But I also think larger than that is probably a comfort feeling of, okay, I'm not being transferred. I'm not being dismissed as a patient. I actually am gaining something. Someone is coming to my team in addition, where I think there's a lot of approaches that, like I say, you actually lose access to your midwife. They aren't able to see you in clinic anymore. They aren't able to be part of your care team anymore. They aren't the ones who are managing your labor, especially in induction. And so then you're actually handed off to someone who, A, you probably never meet all in the same room. You get dismissed from your midwifery care, and your very next appointment, you go into a room with an unfamiliar face, an unfamiliar name, and a care provider who you have probably never met before, which is very scary.
Yeah, I think if I could change one thing about like other OB practices, it would be that like switch. Like it doesn't have to be that. And I think a lot of people in the population think it has to be that way, and probably a lot of providers think it has to be that way. So there's definitely work to do in that spectrum, but there's good and bad for our practice specifically. We have 6 midwives, right? And we do 24-hour shifts. So whichever midwife is on your 24-hour shift, like that is the person you're going to be with. So unfortunately, there's not a way for me to say this patient will always see me and only have me at their birth. And that's a little bit of a sad part. I also like going home and sleeping and having time with my family. So it does work. But the nice thing is that we are grouped in nice, like everyone knows, right? There's going to be a midwife there. So even if they don't know which midwife, they know one of us will be through all of those conditions, high risk, low risk. Somebody comes in and has a baby within 5 minutes of arriving, or they're there for 3 days for an induction, right? They're having a midwife through that whole process. And then to touch back on what we had talked about a little bit ago, I think one of the other things that is super important is that we talk each other up. Our physicians will say, this midwife is going to see you next, and she's really great. And I'll say, I'm on with this doctor for this 24 hours, and I know you've never met them, but they're amazing at what they do. And that's just going to help build the relationship and build the atmosphere of success.
Absolutely. And so behind the scenes, what we as patients don't see, what's your communication like between the midwife team and the obstetrical team?
Honestly, it's pretty informal because we, especially where we're at now, like we've all been working together for several years, right? So it's a lot easier, but it's a quick text after coming out of a room. No patient identifying information, but just room 2, this is what's happening. Or we're starting to push in this room, just so you know where we're at. For us, it's really informal, but I think that helps actually in the success of it because we just can do back and forth communication throughout the process. And I think it's working.
Absolutely. And I imagine it removes that stigma of calling doctors at 2 a.m. You already know that they're not going to be mad. You already know that they actually know they're on call and they're at home waiting for you to call should you need something. They want you to reach out because they are eager to be part of a supportive team. So it removes this idea of don't bother the doctor, which is going to remove so much pressure from your midwifery team of feeling as if they have to let it get to a certain point or so bad before they reach out. You might as well reach out preemptively, and maybe the doctor never needs to come in at all.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that trust is just so important. And it's not an easy answer for the rest of the country of like, how do you build that? It takes time, it takes effort, but when it works, it just works so well.
One of the things I'm not hearing you talk about that I think is probably present in other places and other facilities, and you may say, no, hee hee, we've got plenty of those, but ego. You haven't said anything where someone's ego has been at play and OB feels like they can't trust their midwives because they think the midwives are going to overstep, or the midwives don't want to call the OB because their ego is leave me out of it unless I absolutely need to come in. So I'm not hearing any sort of ego at play that's going to compromise that trust or the patient care.
I agree with you. We all have days and minutes, right, where we're like maybe not at our best, but overall we do that it's very true. We have to be able to know that the team works together well, and ego is such a huge part of that. Or if you think your way is the only way, then that's not going to always go over well with the rest of the team. So being flexible, being willing to be part of the team and just have discussions and good communication, all of that plays really well into the success of OB units all over, I think.
Of everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like everybody, including our patients and their outcomes, fare better. Okay, so how do you navigate that? I know you mentioned you've all been working together for a long time, so I imagine that your turnover is very low. But let's say that you should introduce someone new to your team and maybe they get past the hiring process and you all thought that they were really awesome. And then once you started to work with them, you started to realize, hey, this person has got a little bit of an ego where the rest of us don't necessarily have that. What would you say that your approach as a unit would be to that person?
I would love to say it always is just a perfect flow and great communication, right? But usually it's a situation that arises in an unexpected way that then you have the opportunity to say, let's all take a step back because this is how this unit and this is how we've all been functioning. And let's talk about that and see how we can get to that place. And we have had a couple of providers come on staff and we've had to make some adjustments with each other. But again, I think that over the time, it works well because they see, of course, our good outcomes and the things that we're doing that are good. And they come to respect that too. And then it's just different. You have a teaching facility that's doing 10,000 births a year. There's not room for a lot of the things that we do. We're small. We know that. We don't have the most high risk patients. We are the facility I'm at right now only does between 700 and 800 births a year. But so that just that atmosphere is different depending on where you're at. For us, it works. We have to sometimes ease them in and say, look, we are smaller and this is how we function. And we've been doing it a long time and it's working.
Why wouldn't your approach work at a larger hospital?
Well, I just think it would take a lot more time and integration because I'm absolutely a proponent that midwives should be everywhere and midwives should be in those places too. Sometimes the volume and the speed of things, right, can hinder how people decide to make change. But I think that change would be pretty impactful in a larger facility too.
Yeah, and
I'm sort of an eternal optimist though.
yeah, I was about to say, I'm notoriously a challenger in a very gentle and respectful way, but just because something is hard and would take longer and more effort, for me, doesn't say it's impossible. It says okay, we need the toughest people. We need the people who are super committed. We need the people who are in it to win it. And if that's not you, that's okay for you to admit that and say, you know what, I don't want to work for the next 5 years to integrate this program. I don't want to be the one that's having hard conversations. I don't want to sit at a table where I'm having to reflect on my own self and some of my personal downfalls and some of my personal weaknesses to see where I can grow. Maybe you're not fit for that program. Maybe you should move on to somewhere where you are fit, or maybe with that attitude, you no longer have a place in medicine. And I would love for that to be our answer, that if you're not willing to do the internal work and set your ego aside and say, I am going to work cohesively with my colleagues and I am going to put RVUs aside and I am going to trust the midwives that I work with. I would love for that to be our new wave of healthcare in the US because, quite frankly, our families deserve that.
And we have to do something because what we've been doing hasn't been making it better. It's been a place that we've got a lot of work to do, and it's hard work, and it's not something that just is, oh, here's this quick little thing. If you do this, it's going to be great. It's a lot more involved than that, but it's worth it. What else do we have except our new generation, right? We have to make it better.
And if we don't have moms and babies coming out alive and untraumatized from the birth process, you're right. What do we have as a nation? We have a mentally ill, very sick mom and baby duo that can't bond together, parents who are not confident in their abilities, and a nation that just continuously oppresses them and takes advantage of them. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think that's anyone's goal. We want families to thrive and we want them to be healthy and we want people to continue to have babies. But you're right, the system that we have now is just not doing it. OMG, I'm getting so close to the third trimester. And let's be honest, pregnancy is so magical, but also exhausting, swollen, sweaty. And let me just say it, it's not always glam. That's why I'm here to introduce you to the softest, most luxurious way to pamper yourself while growing a tiny human, Cozy Earth. You have heard me talk about them so much because they have genuinely made such a big difference in my pregnancy, and I cannot wait to also have them in postpartum. Their bamboo pajamas are what I call an instant exhale. They stretch with my belly, they feel like silk without the sweat, and somehow they always make me feel put together, even when I'm still wearing my PJs at 4 p.m. Whether you're lounging, nesting, or napping in between kicks, these PJs are the cozy hug that you didn't know that you needed. And if you're anything like me, your bed becomes your command center during pregnancy. Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets are what dreams are made of. Literally. They're breathable, moisture wicking, and cool to the touch so that you can kiss those middle of the night hot flashes and sweats goodbye. Plus, you can try them risk-free for 100 nights with their sleep trial, and they come with a 10-year warranty. This is next level comfort. You deserve to feel pampered, cared for, and downright luxurious while you're doing the world's hardest job, growing a human. Use code HEHE for 40% off at CozyEarth.com. That's almost half off to give your body the gift of restful nights and luxurious lounging during the day. And you know what I always say, a cozy mama makes for a well-loved baby. Try Cozy Earth because growing a baby deserves nothing less than 5-star comfort. Visit CozyEarth.com and use code HEHE for 40% off. Okay, I do want to dive into the licensure structure that you talked about earlier, that you aren't able to have an independent license in Pennsylvania because you have to have, is it an overseeing MD? You have to have an MD that kind of not governs you, but oversees you, guides you, is a mentor to you, is a consultant to you. I too can think of really good and really bad things from this. I'd love to dive into that conversation because I think typically when people hear that, their gut reaction is either, oh, that's wonderful, or it's, oh, hell no, I would never want that. And I think there's a good balance that we can strike. And maybe that is the key to moving forward to getting improved access to midwifery care across our entire nation.
Yeah, that's such a deep dive because you're going to get lots of opinions. If you ask 10 people, there's 10 different opinions.
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely, for access and really for what we're trained to do, certified nurse midwives, it's the same training and the same process as any nurse practitioner, which a lot of people actually don't know that. But like I have the same degree that a family nurse practitioner has. I just specialized in women's healthcare and birth, right? So that's the first thing. But the second part of that is that we've been trained and our education allows us to be independent practitioners. And that's like our scope and what we're supposed to do, what we're allowed to do, however you want to word it, allows us to do that. So we should have legislation that supports that. And by far, that's the way that we're going to get more access across the board for people that need it. The collaboration is helpful when people are new. Absolutely. When we first come out of school, we need some support and we need a way to know how to function in healthcare. And some states have a mix of that, where like the first certain amount of time as a new practitioner is under sort of a collaborator, but then that sort of goes away after a certain amount of time. So then maybe that's a good way to look at it. Most of the collaboration centers around prescriptive authority and like the medications and prescribing. And I don't really know where that stems from, honestly, like why it has to be that or what is the holdup for states to let go of that. Certainly, we've all heard horror stories of people practicing really not safely. And I think that fear is part of it, where people are like, what about that one time that nurse practitioner did this thing and that was really unsafe? So now let's make sure all of them have oversight. Not really the right answer, but I think that's where some of that has come from. And it just hasn't ever changed. A lot of this stems from years and years of that supervision. Not most, I'm not sure where we're at in numbers of states, but a lot of states, if you look across the country, are passing or in the process of passing independent practice for nurse midwives as well as nurse practitioners. Nurse practitioners, interestingly, are usually faster and a lot sooner. If you look at the legislation, like for some reason, there's this weird shift that nurse practitioners are different than midwives, which we really aren't. We're just specializing in a different way. So I I hope that we all get to independent practice because that just gives us more options. And that doesn't mean that I still don't have a physician that I work very closely with, especially in the facility that I'm at. It actually wouldn't really change what we do because we already have that relationship. But it would allow me as a practitioner, if I wanted to open up an independent practice and then begin to give access to more people. That's a long answer.
No, that was a perfect answer. And it circled me back to the idea of egos because I do think ego drives a lot of fear. And I think that from personal experience, I've done legislative work down in the state of Mississippi. And for any listeners who don't know, I grew up in Mississippi. It's my origin state, and I still really love Mississippi. And it pains me so much, literally breaks my heart how poorly our healthcare is run down there and the stats that we see coming out of the great state of Mississippi are just absolutely abhorrent. They're really terrible. And there are really easy things that we could do to help improve those stats. And one of the legislation pieces I was working on was improving access to midwifery care by providing licensure. And we got in this very interesting chokehold that I did not see coming. I naively thought that anybody who cared about the state of Mississippi, whether you were a midwife or an OBGYN or another health practitioner, or you were a health or public official, so our politics, our politicians, I thought we would all be on board, improve licensure so that we could get more midwives in our state. And boy, could I have not been more wrong. I was very surprised to learn that there was a big split between midwives. There were midwives who absolutely vehemently did not want licensure. Then there were midwives who absolutely said we have to have it to make it safe. Then we had a group of OBGYNs, the majority of them down in Mississippi, wanted to have governance over the midwives. So that created another subgroup of midwives who either said, yes, we're okay with this because I am okay working in conjunction with OBs. And then there was a subset of midwives who said, absolutely not. I will never be governed by OBGYNs. And then I found that our politicians were caught in this crosshair. You had some politicians who lended their ear to the OBGYNs and they were really resistant to listening to the midwife's point of view. And then you had some politicians who really understood the midwife's point of view, but they also understood the power of the Mississippi Medical Association. And so there was all of this back and forth that when I first began to dip my toes in this legislation down there, I could not have pinpointed this in my wildest dreams as being a roadblock in this process. And I was honestly completely shook up about it. I just really couldn't understand how we couldn't get on the same page because at the end of the day, we weren't necessarily fighting for the rights of midwives and OBGYNs and who was going to govern who. For me, I was showing up to fight for the rights of our patients so that we can improve midwifery access as a whole, so that at the end of the day, we could stop falling dead last when it came to health stats. And it seemed like no matter what conversation I was a part of, our families and our health stats fell dead last. They weren't being brought up, they weren't being elevated. These were not the problems that we were discussing. We were literally fighting over who had the right to make their own decisions and what did autonomous practice for midwives actually look like and why they shouldn't answer to OBs or why OBs should have the governing power over midwifery care. And it was honestly very disheartening to me. I cried a lot of tears over that.
Yeah, and I think I didn't even mention, again, here's my optimism bubbling up, right? There's still states that are very restrictive practice. Maybe Mississippi is still that way. I'm not sure where they're
Mhm.
at, where
Yeah.
like I cannot practice without really direct and really overbearing oversight from an obstetrician. So, and we're not doing, there's nothing helpful for that. Not that it's more work for the obstetrician. It's really frustrating for midwives, and neither of them are wanting to really do that in the way that it's set up legislatively. And then for sure, the families are at the very bottom of that.
It's really sad, especially for a country where we know our health stats are continuing to get worse. You would think that these conversations would be much more involving the end goal of how do we improve midwifery care. And that may differ from region to region, right? So in Mississippi, we have very few
Yeah.
midwives, but out west, we have a lot of midwives, much more than in Mississippi. And then I would say, personally, in New England, and people, listeners, don't quote me on this. I've not ever looked into necessarily the whole stats, but what I will say is over the last 10 years, I have attended hundreds of births across the nation, and it feels as if the West has really got it going on. The South is super behind, and then the Northeast region, we've got a lot of it figured out, but we're not doing it as well as the West is doing it. And I think that right here in the beginning, as we start to improve that access and we start to get more midwives out in our healthcare system, it may be based on region, but eventually you would hope that every single woman had access to midwifery care. Every single low risk birther had access to midwifery care. Every single person, whether you're low or high risk, had access to that co-care team of still being able to see a midwife and being able to have access to an OBGYN who's going to respect that midwifery care and that patient autonomy.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind. One, when we're talking back about the licensure and things, it's interesting, like in Pennsylvania specifically, nurse practitioners are all licensed under the Board of Nursing, but nurse midwives are under the Board of Medicine. So again, there's this like really interesting, oh, okay, you have this degree, but midwives, you're going to be governed a little differently, right? So even that is restrictive in its own way. Really interesting. I don't know where it all stems. I haven't done a lot of that research, but and then again to your point of getting that care team where it's supposed to be. I know we have a little hidden gem where I'm at that, like I said, 99% of labors are managed by midwives. I don't know very many facilities that aren't like a birth center that can probably say that. I know there's some out there, but it's not the most common scenario. But when we're talking about what we really started off talking about, we talk about C-section rates a lot just because it's a measurable thing. It's a way that we can compare a really large facility and a really small facility of having similar outcomes, right? When, again, when that level of midwifery care is present, again, high risk people, like I have managed many diabetics, I've co-managed many preeclamptics, other conditions too, and have been able to keep them from having a C-section because of that management. And that's not tooting my own horn. That's just saying midwives in general. What do we do best? We manage labor. And I'm managing a lot of inductions, right? I'm not just talking about people rolling in spontaneous labor. That's our favorite. We love it every day. I always joke with the nursing team when somebody's third baby, she rolls in 9 centimeters and we don't have time to do anything except catch a baby. I'm like, give it to me all day, every day. I could do this all the time. But that's not what we get to do all the time. When we really, this little pocket of our facility gets to keep people from the operating room, which impacts their future health. It impacts their future reproductive choices. And even if it's only 700 people a year that we're helping with, it's still making an impact where we're at. And a lot of times we have the conversation of a physician can do everything that a midwife can do, but a midwife can't do everything a physician can do. Sometimes we hear that when we're talking about salaries and who we're hiring, but I don't agree with that statement at all because what we do as midwives is not something that's really taught. If you talk to any of us, we're called to the work. We know we have to be in the birth space and it's not to do procedures and it's not to do surgeries. And I'm not saying that all obstetricians think that way, but there's a lot that midwives can do that physicians can't do. And it's not always a number on a piece of paper, but there's just so much power and like that calling for us. It's like it's in our blood. And that's what's meaningful to people when they come into the birth space.
What are these conversations looking like when you have someone who, let's say, at a different facility just 10 miles up the road, or Pennsylvania is really a gym all in itself, let's say in a different state, would being wheeled back to a C-section right now, no questions asked, nobody on the floor is questioning it, nobody on the floor is asking, what else can we do? What are you guys doing differently? Does it start in that prenatal care? Does it start way before we get to this decision? Or when you get into these situations, are you having specific conversations that other facilities are not having? And maybe it's all of it. Maybe it's a combination of your entire approach.
That's a good question. I've never thought of it in that way. I think historically, in this area specifically, it does make a difference that people know the midwives have been here, right? So they know when they come to our hospital, there's the midwife team there. We actually have a fairly large population of Amish and Mennonite people, and they drive for quite a ways away, because they know that when they walk through our doors, there's a midwife. And that community really values their midwives. Like they really have a respect there, and they would rather have that interaction before an obstetrician because of that history with them. So that's a side note. But so I think that's part of it. But really, I think a lot of people will ask me in one of their very first OB visits, they'll say something regarding a C-section because people talk about it. How will I know when I need a C-section? And my response is, we're going to assume and plan for a vaginal delivery unless something tells us otherwise. And that means all the way up through labor, right? It might be the very end of labor before we know that we have to take a different route. So I think that mentality is pretty prevalent among our midwives, and that it starts there and it starts in the prenatal visits. And then again, anytime a pregnant person calls our call line or a nurse line, they're going to talk to one of us. So they're seeing us in their prenatals, they're hearing from us what they have pregnancy questions, they see us when they come in labor, and then they see us all throughout their labor. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think we're well integrated in this community at least, and people know that we're going to be there.
I love that so much. Is your facility routinely offering 39-week induction, or is that something that you stay away from?
I like to say that I have a good middle of the road approach, but I think that I would say all of our providers have that middle of the road approach. And that means some have a little bit more on this way and some of them have a little more this way. And so I always mention the option of a 39-week induction because I believe informed consent gives everybody all of their options, not just the ones that we think they may want to hear or maybe that we want them to hear. And so I always bring it up like after 39 weeks that we don't have to have a medical indication for induction. And if you feel like that's something you want, then let's talk about it. So it's not something that we heavily promote, like everyone at 39 weeks should be scheduled for an induction. But there are some legitimate reasons why people at 39 weeks may choose that for themselves. And I think they should know what the options are and what the risks and benefits are and the alternatives to not doing that. So on the flip side, when I have somebody that's absolutely not, I don't want a cervical exam, I don't want to be induced, then I can meet them there too. And we can have a conversation of what that looks like throughout their pregnancy.
Without any coercion or influence or pressure to try and get them to sway their decision.
Yeah. Yeah. That's always my goal. Like I said, I do have colleagues who would be a little bit more, maybe we should talk more about the 39-week induction. And that's okay. We all have our different ways of working. But the nice thing about working in a big group practice like this is that if somebody decides a 39-week induction is what they want to do, like maybe I didn't talk to them about that, and I'm going to see them the next time and talk to them about it again and maybe in a different way and make sure that everything's where it should be.
And that they feel confident in knowing all of their options and what they've chosen going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that so much. Okay, how many of your patients would you say are doing medicalized birth, meaning having an epidural versus unmedicalized birth? And do you think that plays into your ability to keep your C-section rate really low?
I think we're maybe a little bit lower than what nationally people are seeing. I haven't looked at the statistics recently, but I think around 75% nationally of women birthing in hospitals choose an epidural. I would say we're just probably a little under that, maybe between 60 and 70%. I think the side note about epidurals is it's a tool in our basket, and we want to make sure we have opportunity if we need it, but not something that we have to have.
And for your epiduralized patients, what are you doing during their labor to help them avoid a C-section and keep that baby moving down and keeping them mobile?
To really tout our nurses, who are my favorite people in the whole world. But a couple of things. One is we have the wireless monitors. So our ability to get people moving, and even hydrotherapy we don't do hydro or water birth, but we do hydrotherapy throughout labor. And our nurses are great. Like instead of the cliche of you have to get back in bed, you need to be in this position, most of our nurses walk in and go, why are you in bed? Let's get you out of bed. And not with an epidural, obviously. But those people, yeah, we have peanut balls. We have just started, we've done kind of a little bit of spinning babies type education, and we're getting more of that. But even before people are formally trained, we were like, hey, let's do some of these things so that we can keep people moving, keep the pelvis doing some different things to promote physiologic birth. And all of our nurses are so good at that, of just movement and labor, regardless of what your pain management is.
I love that so much. Okay, and then obviously we met at A1 and I feel like there were multiple conversations about Pitocin and how do we appropriately use Pitocin, much like an epidural. It is a tool in our toolbox. We're really glad that we have it for advancing labors when we need it, for managing postpartum hemorrhage when we need it, for inductions when we need it. On the flip side of that coin, I think we're all well aware that we have let that Pitocin be a runaway train. We're seeing so much inappropriate use that it is causing some harm. So, how are you guys managing Pitocin use on your unit? Plus, how many of the people in your unit actually need Pitocin? Because I think that question comes from, I know where I am in Boston, there are so many units that, regardless of whether there's actually a medical indication, it is offered or pushed or administered in almost every single birth. And it really comes down to that patient, that mom knowing, I don't want this and I'm going to advocate for something different. And if left to their own devices, the hospital would have it involved in every single labor.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is very much my own personal experience, so I'm not speaking for facilities everywhere, midwives everywhere, but our group of midwives and me specifically, we really, if somebody comes in spontaneous labor, Pitocin's not even on my mind.
Nice.
I am not thinking about it. Like, why would I automatically be thinking about adding something to something that's already happening? I don't think that we jump to that. And I can't tell you like what we did or if we ever did anything. We just respected spontaneous birth. We just don't automatically assume we're going to need it. Now, maybe we, especially people, a lot of people come in and ask, like, can you break my water? Because they have an understanding or a belief that's going to make their labor go faster, and maybe that's their desire. So that is that an intervention? Yes. There's also always a place for that. But again, if it's spontaneous labor, I'm not automatically thinking, when can I break water? When can I start Pitocin? It's going to be the opposite of if the labor ends up going longer than we expect for some reason, or something else is happening that we need to augment that labor. I've seen a few times where people get epidurals and all those extra fluids calm their body down, and all of a sudden we have one contraction in 20 minutes. And we have to talk about, is that okay? Are we going to wait a little bit, see what happens? Are we going to do something about that? So is there a place for that? Sure. But that's not the routine, right? Most people's body, if they're especially spontaneous labor, is going to continue to spontaneously labor. Of course, inductions is Pitocin is a huge part of that. That's what it's for. But I think that's when it's the tool that we need. But there's also opportunity. That's not always the only answer. And we can use it judiciously. And the newer research is saying maybe we turn it off in active labor. I think some of us are playing with that just anecdotally. And I think we just have to always keep our ears open and see what's really happening and respect, again, that knowledge, that informed consent. Don't just assume people are going to want it. And then don't just assume people are going to need it.
Okay, and on the train of assumptions, I think a lot of people assume that their providers are just up to date on the latest research. And you have said throughout this conversation a couple of things that have keyed me into the idea that you are really up to date on the most recent research and that you do really value practicing evidence-based medicine. Would you say that is something that is valued by your entire unit? And if so, what are you guys doing to ensure that everyone on your unit are up to date on the latest data and do know about these newer ideas of possibly turning off Pitocin in active labor?
We don't probably do this as well as I'd like, honestly. Like, we can always do better on communicating as a team. So I think, like, I may try something, but maybe don't really talk about it. I'm just like learning about it in my own practice. So really bringing that up is important. We have monthly OB provider meetings where we can bring up some information or a policy change. One of those recent ones, and for some people listening that are in OB, will be like, it took you that long, but is not doing routine urine dips at a prenatal visit. So that's something that hasn't been evidence-based for a while, but we'd been doing it. And then finally, just a few months ago, we said, can we look at this again? And we said, there's not a need for this, right? And actually, some of our nurses in our office were like, what? We can't not do this. So that education had to happen. So we're finally up to date there, but just takes time for people to accept the new information, integrate it into their practice, and then even the patients that have been with our practice for many years are like, I was expecting this. Like, why are we not doing that? Now I'm worried that I'm going to get preeclampsia because you haven't dipped my urine, which is actually not really a risk we have to worry about, but they think it is. And so it's just a process and we have to be patient with each other. But yeah, talking about it when we have meetings, when we see something that needs to be brought to the most current evidence, bring that up with our colleagues and be able to make the change and patient with each other for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one other thing that, and this is easier said than done and easier implemented in smaller hospitals and facilities and much harder when you work at this really, again, we're in Boston, so we're in like the healthcare mecca of the United States, and we have these ginormous hospitals where I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't even know everybody that worked on your unit, right? If you never have seen a certain nurse or a certain doctor, honestly would not be surprised, which would pose much more of a challenge. But if throughout the year facilities could take a pause and evaluate their stats over the last 3, 4, 6 months to just get a pulse check on, is what we're doing working? And if it's not, how can we pivot? How can we make it better? And then when you get the time to say, okay, what we've been doing has been working, is there a space for us to improve it even more? And I just think that would be so pivotal.
I think there is some really high value on some of those bigger health systems when they really get the vibe or get the wave of something because they'll find out something that the evidence supports and that maybe isn't super complicated. And they'll send an email out and they'll be like, starting Monday, whatever it is, right? We're turning off Pitocin at 7 centimeters for everybody. I don't think that would ever happen, but like they decide that it's going to be the thing and it goes out and everybody starts doing it. So there's some value in those bigger numbers when somebody gets on fire about something, it can change fast and it can be something that is widely accepted. But some of those bigger facilities have a good place for that too.
Yeah, they have some real power. Oh my gosh, I love this so much. You guys know I love nothing more than having these conversations that jazz me up and give me a lot of hope for our future. And I am not one of these pessimist people. I really I know that there's a better way that our healthcare system can operate, and I know that we're headed in that direction. I do think that we've got some hard times ahead of us, and I'm not going to try and make light of that. I'm not going to say, look, we're on the upward trajectory, we're on the up and up, it's all beautiful rainbows and butterflies from here on out. I know it's not. I know there are going to be places where we hit ruts and where our healthcare system feels like it might be crumbling down around us, but I promise you that if we stick with it and we stay on the straight and narrow and we keep the forefront of our mind actually on the goal of what we're trying to achieve, to lower our C-section rates, to lower our birth trauma and induction rates, to actually use the tools in our toolbox appropriately and when necessary. I really believe that our nation could be so great at birth, and I know that we could do it as well, maybe even better than the countries who have just completely left us in the dust right now. And so, Julie, truly, thank you so much for being here. I want to wrap up with one last question because I know there are so many people listening being like, this is fantastic. I don't live in Pennsylvania. So now what am I supposed to do? So if there's anyone out there listening and they feel like they have that fire in their heart and they have the gumption to take on this type of task, and they're in a unit that with the right people, with the right person, with the right pursuit, they could make this change and they could start to implement this. What do you say to those people? Where should they start? And what advice do you have for them when it comes to helping them implement a program or protocol that is actually going to make a difference in their C-section rates?
I think the first thing is, as people that work around birth, like sometimes it can feel overwhelming that there's so many different facets of it. So we really do have to narrow down in our heart what we feel like is the most important thing for us to work on because we can't do it all the time. So really reflecting and figuring out what's the most important thing for you to focus on as a nurse or doula or midwife, whatever your role is, and then find people that are in alignment with you, find the evidence, and you just have to not give up because the fight is not easy, but it is worth it. And there are things that we're going to be able to do to make a difference for one person, two people, 1,000 people. It doesn't matter. We're just going to be able to move forward if we have that passion and just don't let other people stop us with what we want to do.
Don't be strayed, you guys. I promise you, if you keep your
It's
eye
worth
on
it.
the prize, it will be worth it in the end. And it doesn't mean that you won't face resistance, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to have hard conversations, and you may even be fired from a place or two. But once you find that place that envelops everything that you have envisioned and is receptive to the ideas that you are bringing and wants to do better just like you do, oh my gosh, I promise you it'll change your life. It'll make you be like, wow, this is what I was meant for. This is why I'm here on this earth. I love it so much. Julie, truly, you are a gym. It seems like Pennsylvania is also a gym. It seems like your facility is such a special and magical place for families, and that your community is so lucky to have you as a midwife and to have your facility serving them. And I'm very hopeful that we will be able to replicate this across our nation. And hopefully, in future conferences, I will see you speaking about this and educating other providers and facilities on exactly how they can do this in their home state and their hometown. Thank you so much for being here. If people wanted to connect with you, learn more about this project, learn more about how you guys are implementing this, where can people connect with you?
Probably the best place is my Facebook page is called The Joyful Midwife. They can send me a message there and we can connect with their questions or anything they may want to talk about.
I love it. All right, you guys, as always, you know that we'll link it in the show notes of how you can get a hold of Julie. And thanks for being here, y'all. I know that sometimes when you look around our healthcare system, it can feel like total demise. I know sometimes we look around and we go, oh my gosh, how did we get into this burning dumpster? But I want to show you and I want to highlight and elevate the voices that there are pockets of places that are doing it really well. And that gives us all hope, because if it is possible for this little hospital in Pennsylvania, then it is possible for all of us. And I know that if you're out there working at a place that does 6, 8, 10,000 births a year, you're probably thinking, that's not right, it would be impossible. And I want to really challenge you to just sit with that. And why do you feel like that's so impossible? It's not. It'll be different than what Julie and her colleagues have done. And you may have to work a little harder, and you may have to have a little bit harder conversations, or they may come more often, or you may have to push a little stronger. But I promise you, it is so possible. We can absolutely change our healthcare system and improve our outcomes and improve our patient relationships and help our moms and our babies in our country have a joyous and wonderful, informed, consensual, confident birth. And I know that you guys care so much about that, just as I do. All right, you guys, I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow me on social media. You can find me at Tranquility by Hee and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm Hee, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.